Hi, my name is Allison Arnold. I'm the agriculture agent with the Cooperative Extension Service here in Buncombe County, and I'll be your host today. We're so glad that you could join us today. I want to welcome you to Gardening in the Mountains, the Native-Nativar Dilemma. Dr. Carrie DiGiaco earned her PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She has taught ecology at Queen's University of Charlotte, Pfeiffer University, Catawba College, and UNC Charlotte, and has also taught for programs including the Certificate in Native Plant Studies, Master Naturalist, and Master Gardener training. Since 2016, she has worked as an ecological consultant through her business for the birds and the bees. In 2025, she co-founded Constructive Plant Rescue, helping rescue native plants during development. When she's not working with plants and wildlife, she enjoys spending time with her musician husband and creating stained glass. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Carrie DiGiaco.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for that introduction, Allison. Okay, so the Native-Nativar Dilemma. We've got people here from a variety of backgrounds. So I want to start with some definitions to make sure we're all on the same page and understand some of the terminology that we've got here. First off, a nativar is simply a cultivar of a native plant. This term nativar popped up within the last decade, I believe, to refer to cultivars that are of native plant species. So now let's get into what exactly it is for something to be native and what exactly it is for something to be a cultivar. First off, I'd like to address what it means for something to be native. What determines whether a plant is native to your area or not? This is a map of the US showing hardiness zones. One thing that many people who have been gardening for many years, and those of us who just more recently get into it, one of the things that commonly comes up is hardiness zones. What hardiness zone are you in? This is something that has been used horticulturally for at least 50 years. If you know what zone you're in, then that tells you what you can plant, what will do well and survive in your area. But when we're referring to natives, this is really not appropriate. I'm over here in the Piedmont of North Carolina, where I'm in zone 8A. And if we follow along zone 8A, things that are present in Western Texas would do well here. But things that are native to Western Texas are not necessarily things that are native to my area. So something that we need to keep in mind is that our hardiness zone really does nothing when we're trying to decide what is native to our area. This is a map showing average annual precipitation across the US. The darker the blue color is, the more rainfall we get. We can see that in West Texas, they certainly don't get nearly as much rainfall as I would get here. Just because we get the appropriate amount of rainfall in an area, that also doesn't mean that something is native to your area. So you guys that are in Western North Carolina and the Southern Appalachian region here, wow, there's a lot of variability there from one little valley to the next and how much rainfall you're going to get. So that also doesn't necessarily plug into what we would consider native. This is showing just our area here with North Carolina. We can see how incredibly variable that rainfall is in your all's area back here in Western Carolina. So what we really want to get into more when we're talking about what's native is what we call ecoregions. I will frequently provide my sources down here for you if these are resources that you would like to look into for more information. This map is showing all of the ecoregions of the United States. Back in grade school, we learned about things like biomes. According to the biomes of the US, the whole eastern part of our country would be considered eastern deciduous forest. But we know that those forests differ significantly from Pennsylvania to North Carolina to Alabama to Florida. The term ecoregion gets into really more specifically things like climate and also things like the types of rocks and soil in an area. When we zoom in to our neck of the woods a little bit closer here, we can see that the Carolina Piedmont for example, is here in the center of this 45 number here, which is the outer Piedmont region. You guys in the mountains are in 66. Number 66 is defined as the Blue Ridge. This has forested slopes, high gradient, cool streams. It has primarily metamorphic rocks, areas of igneous and sedimentary geology. And you guys actually have a ton of different sorts of rocks that underlay the soil that you have in that area. The type of rock you have determines the characteristics of the soil. And additionally, things like elevation, how much rainfall, how much erosion there has been, all of these sorts of things are also impacting the sorts of things that are native to which areas. The Southern Appalachian Mountains are one of the most biodiverse regions in the entire world. And it's because there is such a significant diversity of different soil types there, which come from the varying geology of this oldest mountain range in the world. All those little nooks and crannies in the geography with the hills and the valleys and the steep sides and the more gentle sides, and all of those things together create different sorts of niches for different species to take hold. You guys really have just tremendous diversity in your area in general. One thing that I like to think about when I'm talking about which sorts of plants are native to my area or your area, you want to first focus in on your own ecoregion. Obviously, if you're living in Buncombe County, you're in this Blue Ridge ecoregion here. But what if you want to expand your choice range a bit? Maybe you want to consider things like climate change, where things are getting warmer in many areas and our rainfall is getting more sporadic. If we want to consider things like climate, we need to consider the fact that plants need to be able to migrate with a climate in order to be successful as a species. One thing that we can do to try to help the plant communities and the wildlife that rely on those plant communities is participate in a little bit of assisted migration, which will basically consist of us helping the organisms that might typically be native in areas that are a bit outside of our own ecoregion, maybe help some of those things get into the gardens in our own region to see if those guys would be able to tolerate the conditions there. We definitely need to, especially with the amount of land development we're doing all over the place these days, a lot of organisms are not going to be able to move as effectively with the changing climate as they otherwise would be able to. When I'm looking for plants that would be native to my own ecoregion, I consider ones that are native to the Southern Piedmont. I reach down here a little bit and find things that might not be native to my area right here in the Carolinas, but maybe reach into the area down here into northern Georgia and central Alabama, into these portions of the ecoregion as well, to see if we can move those up a bit. So if I were in zone 66, for example, I might also choose plants that might be native to ecoregion 68 here, or possibly 67 as well. But with 67, you'd have to be really careful because you don't want to get plants that are native to the northern part of that ecoregion, as your temperatures are likely to be warming up quite a bit. So I'd probably consider things that are south of the area here to be ones that would be reasonable natives. I think also about how these plants are moving around naturally, how they would be moving around naturally if humans weren't developing the landscape at the rate that we were. You definitely want to keep to east of the Mississippi River here. Different people have different ways of saying what's native, but we don't really want to consider something that's on the other side of the Mississippi River, on the other side of the US. There's no way those would ever make their way to our part of the continent by themselves naturally. So we want to try to stick with both the soil that we have, the soil type, the climate that we have, but also be willing to reach a little bit outside of our own native ecoregion here to try to help a little bit with the changing climate. This is our area here in North Carolina and South Carolina, and we can see how extremely variable that terrain is. If we think about how plant species might be migrating naturally if humans weren't destroying the environment quite so much, If there were areas up in this region that were warming up a little too much for the plants that have been living there for the past few thousand years to be doing well, it's species coming from this direction down here that would be most naturally able to make it into these areas here. We can assist that migration a little bit and try to help get things from these locally surrounding areas into that region. This is what I use as a good resource to help me figure out which plants are actually native to my area. This website, bonap.org, and this stands for the Biota of North America program. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but this is the closest tool that I have found to be able to help me determine what sorts of plants are best for me to consider as native to my area. So when you get to this webpage, you'll want to go down here and look at the county level distribution and click on this link right here to list plants by genera. That takes me to a page here where it's got all these different letters, and then below there, it's got all of these different genera. We can then either click on a letter to go further down the page, or we can just scroll down. And these are all of the different genera that we have here in North America. If we click on one of these genera here, we'll get a map. So I clicked on Acer, our maple genus. It comes up here with all of these maps, and this page would go on with all of the different species in North America within this Acer genus. So here we can bring up all of these maps. Let's say I want to know if Acer floridanum is native to my area. The dark green color here is showing the states to which this is native. And then we really want to focus in on the lighter green color, and that shows us the counties to which this plant is native. You can go up here and look for the map color key, and they have different colors showing different things, whether it's been introduced to the area or if it's invasive in the area. This is the best tool that I've found for this. I would consider Acer leucoderma our chalk maple. If I were living in the mountainous areas here, I might be willing to pull that into my region in my native landscaping and consider that native to the area as well. I would not consider the macrophyllum native nor the glabrum. These guys are way over on the other side of the country. Acer negundo seems to be a really common, well-adapted species there. Okay, so that's a tool you'll probably want to have in your toolbox. Let's talk about what a cultivar is. The term cultivar simply refers to any plant that's produced via asexual reproduction from an individual that has certain desired characteristics. And these plants are typically given a certain name within their genus or species. So when we're talking about things like asexual reproduction, we're talking basically about cloning of plants. We do this whenever we are taking cuttings of plants, that is cloning a plant. Many plants can grow roots from any axillary bud. These are the nodes of the plant, all the places where the branches and the leaves are coming off. And many plants have the ability to simply grow roots from those areas. We could take various cuttings off of this one plant and put them all in water or soil and get those to grow roots. If we have an individual that has certain characteristics that we really like, we can make lots and lots of clones of that individual, therefore creating a cultivar, okay? So we can take cuttings, we can do grafting, we can do layering, we can do division. These are all different ways that you can clone things asexually to end up with lots of genetic copies of that same exact plant that you had in the first place that had some characteristics that you really liked. These are some pictures of different things. This is from a greenhouse where some folks made some cuttings here off of these. The stem roots that they have left here are resprouting. They probably took the top parts of these and then stuck them in pots with some rooting hormone, perhaps. Sometimes you can just stick them directly down in the ground. This is a cutting from an elderberry in my yard. In early spring, when the leaves on the elderberry were just starting to come out, I took lots of cuttings off the elderberry plants and I just stuck them down in the moist soil every here and there around the yard to see which ones would take. Now I have lots of elderberries that are all clones of one another. Okay, so going back here now, we've got what a cultivar is, we've got what a native plant is. A nativar is simply a cultivar of a plant that is native to an area. That's the entire definition of a nativar, okay? It just means that it's a cultivar of a native plant. To give you some examples, this is from the webpage for the Mount Cuba Center up in Delaware. This is close to where Doug Tallamy has his students doing research. On their website, they have a page on Monarda, which is the group with bee balms. They say Monarda didyma Jacob Klein was discovered by Georgia plantsman Gene Klein near the Blue Ridge Parkway and named for his son. Okay, so we've got our genus here, Monarda, and then the didyma, this is our species part. So the entire scientific name is Monarda didyma. Jacob Klein, in quotes here, that is our cultivar name. Okay, so anytime we see something that's called Monarda didyma Jacob Klein for sale, it is a clone of this one plant that these people found in the Blue Ridge. They have been taking cuttings, propagating this plant asexually ever since because they thought it was just a gorgeous specimen. It had great characteristics. They wanted to make a lot of clones of that so they could spread this plant far and wide, and everyone loves it. So now we have lots and lots of copies of Jacob Klein all over the place. This is another one. This is a cultivar of Monarda fistulosa. They say this is a naturally occurring selection of Monarda fistulosa that was found by Barb and Michael Bridges, named for their daughter. Compared to the straight species, Claire Grace has a sturdier habit, slightly darker purple flowers, better resistance to powdery mildew, and more attractive glossy green foliage. It's a cultivar. The Jacob Klein cultivar is derived from the individual, okay? The original Jacob Klein plant was found in the mountains. They took that one plant. They didn't take, at least from what it sounds like, they did not take many plants and then begin sexually reproducing those together. They took one plant. They took this one plant from this one place, and then they made lots of clones of that one plant. So although it was discovered growing in nature instead of something that was bred in a nursery or lab someplace, it was discovered in nature, but this one individual plant has now been cloned and cloned and cloned, which makes it a cultivar. Okay, that's a definition of a cultivar. A variety, that term simply refers to a group of plants that are native to an area that seem to have characteristics in general that are slightly different from those in other places. So there might be a variety of Monarda fistulosa or Monarda didyma, where within one region, all of the leaves or all of the flowers have this certain weird characteristic to their shape that this species in other areas doesn't have. But a variety is not something that is cloned. The term cultivar refers to something that is cloned in this way in terms of horticultural production. Okay. So with this one as well, these people found a plant that they really liked. They found it outside growing. They found that this one plant, this one individual, was sturdier. Its flowers were slightly darker purple. They took that back to their home, their landscape, their nursery, wherever. They started cloning that plant, growing more of those plants. They found that it was better resistant to powdery mildew, more attractive glossy green foliage than the other Monarda fistulosas that they have. They began cloning that. So now that one individual plant that they initially found has been propagated over and over and over. So we now have thousands and thousands of copies of this one individual plant, which is a cultivar. All right, so the terms nativar and cultivar, these are referring to clones of an individual plant of a species that they are breeding to have special characteristics. We might also hear the term straight species or wild type. So these terms are referring to plants that have not been selected for certain special characteristics. The straight species or wild type, this term is referring to plants that have just randomly come from the species overall. For example, if we're using humans or dogs or anything really, if we want to consider the wild type human, well, there are 8 billion of us on the planet. So you could pick any handful of people and we would all be a little bit different from each other. We're all the same species, but we're all a little bit different. There will be variability among the individuals of a certain species. So you'll find some that are shorter and fatter, some that might be broader at the top than at the bottom. Some are going to be slightly different colors than the others. Some might have more petals than others. Some of them might have better disease resistance than others. We'll discuss in this talk later some additional characteristics that can vary quite a bit within a certain species. If we are going to the garden center, if we see plants for sale that have this cultivar name, that tells us that that plant is a clone of one plant that someone found that they really liked these certain characteristics of. And we can expect that all of the plants that we have that are of that cultivar are going to have exactly the same characteristics. They will have the same kinds of leaves. They will have the same kinds of flowers that if they're grown in the same environment, they will look exactly the same. But if we take those into new environments that might be hotter or drier, then that can cause some physiological changes to occur. Just like if you started feeding me chocolate cake every day, eventually I would begin to look quite different as a person, right? So plants can also vary in their appearance due to those sorts of things, or potentially due to a virus that they have caught, or some sort of fungal infection or something like that can also alter their appearance. But if we're talking about the straight species or wild type, what you get can vary between the individuals. So, for example, if I buy a packet of seeds for our native yarrow, Achillea gracilis, if I have a packet that has thousands of seeds of that species, and it's referred to as just the scientific name, no cultivar name on top of that, then if I have only that species of seeds, I have thousands of different individuals there that have thousands of different combinations of genes, just like we would have 1,000 different kinds of people. Okay. So when I plant all of those seeds, I'm going to get plants of the same species, but some of them might be taller. Some of them might be bushier. Some of them might have flowers that have a slightly different tinge to their color than others. Those are all things that will just come about naturally, the variability between those individuals. So far, so good. Here are a couple of examples. We've got our Echinacea purpurea, and this is our straight species or wild type. And this is just one example of one plant within this species of what it would look like. Okay. Now we've got a couple of our cultivars here, and this is from the Mount Cuba study that they did on Echinacea a handful of years ago. So these are two different cultivars of that. Some cultivars of that same species will look very similar to the species, the wild type, what we consider the most common characteristics for that species. But we may also have some cultivars that look quite different. They might have different kinds of petals. They might have different growth forms. Okay. But for example, if you get a packet of wild type or straight species, Echinacea purpurea seeds, if you plant thousands of those seeds, you may get one or two popping up that have petals that are a slightly different color. That would be native variability within that species. But those ones that you get that might show up with white flowers similar to the fragrant angel cultivar are not the fragrant angel cultivar, because that seed that you got is not an asexual cutting, an actual clone of that fragrant angel plant. This is a cultivar of Monarda. With this one, if you note, as we backed up here, we had a two-part scientific name and then the cultivar. So this tells us that this is the species for that plant. And when we zoom over to this one, here we have the genus Monarda, but then our cultivar is immediately after that. If we don't have a second part to that scientific name, that indicates to us that this plant came as a result of hybridization. And we may not even know exactly which species this plant may have derived from. So this specific cultivar here, the Pardon My Pink, they describe this as a dwarf cultivar with medium pink flowers. Here, we've got a horticultural production happens in really large scale areas like this. Imagine that this whole greenhouse here is filled with various species of Monarda. We might have Monarda didyma, Monarda punctata, Monarda fistulosa. And we have individuals of these different species that are growing in this greenhouse. We've got some crossbreeding going on as pollen from some of these flowers ends up in the flowers of other closely related species that aren't exactly the same as themselves. When we have situations like this, where we can have lots of different plants of the same genus together in an artificial situation where they could be cross-pollinating one another, we may end up with a situation like this, where the people who run this greenhouse go walking through the aisles, looking at all the plants on all the tables. They find a plant that looks different from the others, and they really like it. It happens to be smaller than the others, and it has this bright medium pink shade of flowers. We take that one particular plant, we call it Pardon My Pink, and then we clone the heck out of it. And then we sell all of those genetic copies of that same plant with the name Monarda Pardon My Pink. We don't know which species it is. It might have genes that only come from Monarda fistulosa. It might be genes that mix that with Monarda didyma, with Monarda punctata. We don't know, because all of those plants were together within that greenhouse. Here we have the Echinacea purple emperor. This cultivar would be a nativar as well. In this case, we have a hybrid coneflower here. We've got the Echinacea, which tells us that it is produced from the plants that are in the genus Echinacea. There are various species within this genus. So if the horticulturists are growing multiple species of Echinacea in an area together, they might be cross-pollinating each other, and we might get some hybridization there. So this is not an Echinacea purpurea hybrid. This is simply some sort of Echinacea, and it's a hybrid of that, or a hybrid of that and a cultivar. And because we believe these species are native to our area, we could consider that a nativar. All right, so just to give you some more examples of this, Hydrangea arborescens is one of the hydrangeas that is native to our area. We've got lots of different cultivars here, and different cultivars will have different characteristics, because those are the characteristics of the initial plant that was selected, given this name, and then cloned. We do have some native cultivars now that have some really cool appearances. Over the past decade or two, as native plants have become more desirable in our landscaping for many ecological reasons, horticulturists have been coming up with more and more cultivars of native plants. And so if we're looking for a plant that has certain characteristics, a certain shape, a certain look in our landscape, whereas 10, 20 years ago, you might have not been able to find a plant that would have exactly this look without using a non-native plant. Today, you might be able to find a plant that has that exact look that you're searching for, that is a native cultivar. I'm just showing you here that we've got this tall, skinny form of the Ilex crenata, which is a species that's native to Japan. But we now also have some tall, thin cultivars of our native species that you could use as replacements for those non-native ones in your landscape. This is another example. This is another Japanese holly selected to have this very small, compact, round green shape. And here we have a cultivar of a native species that is also selected to have that little round green ball shape. So it's variation among individuals of a species that enables species to get through challenges, to be long-lived in the grand scale of things. For example, within all of the individuals of a species, let's say Monarda fistulosa, there's a lot of variability among individuals in that species. Some are taller, some are shorter, some have brighter colored flowers, some have paler flowers, some have darker leaves, some are more resistant to the powdery mildew than others. It's because there's a lot of genetic variability within that species that this species is able to adapt to a changing environment, adapt to different sorts of pests, adapt to different sorts of diseases. If we only had one kind of Monarda fistulosa, if we only have Monarda fistulosa Claire Grace, then all of the individual plants all over the place, they're all genetic clones. They're going to have exactly the same capability to deal with environmental changes. They might be very susceptible to drought. They might be very intolerant of expanded heat waves. They might not be able to live through powdery mildew. It's having variation among individuals, and it's the same among people. We don't want inbreeding. Inbreeding is not good. That limits genetic variability and it makes people unhealthy. Same sort of thing goes for plants. If we have nothing but genetic clones of a few handful of individuals, if we have nothing but a lot of Judy Prices, we have a lot of Donna Nelsons, we have a lot of John Bowens, but we don't have the millions and billions of different individuals that we have. If we only have those certain genotypes, those certain genetic instruction booklets, then there might be a lot of things that we can't handle. So it's important for us to make sure that there's still substantial variation within species. I want to show you now some things that exemplify this variation within species. These are results from a study that the Mount Cuba Center did a handful of years ago, looking at the number of pollinator visits to different species and different cultivars of Echinacea. Each one of these different lines here is showing how many pollinators visited the species or the plants that they have of those different kinds. Across the bottom here, we've got tons and tons of different cultivars of Echinacea. Some of them are Echinacea purpurea, some of them are Echinacea hybrids. As we go down and down and down, we've got fewer and fewer pollinator visits to these different kinds of plants. I'm going to zoom in now a little bit and show you what this is like. At the very top here, the plant that actually got the most visitors from the pollinators was the fragrant angel, which doesn't look like the wild type at all, but it must smell really good and taste really good and have very high nutritional value for these pollinators to keep coming back to that. So the wild type here, there would be a lot of variability within this. Within this group here, we're going to have variation among individuals. Each of these cultivars that we see here, these are genetic clones of each of these. Some of them were more popular with the pollinator visitors than others. Looking down at the far end here, we might notice that the more brownish color bar here is the flowers that are called doubled. These are ones that have a lot of extra petals on them. And most of those are way down here at the end. Pollinators really did not care for those a lot. We've got some different kinds here. We've got an Echinacea purpurea with a pollinator. This would be the wild type. Here we have a cultivar called Magnus. He is also very popular with the pollinators. This is one of the extra petaled flowers. Pollinators do not like these because within these composite or daisy shaped flowers, it's actually these flowers in the center that provide all of the pollen and nectar, and the ones around the outside do not. In this case, we have selectively bred this to have lots and lots of the type of flowers that are not producing pollen and nectar for the pollinators. They might look more attractive to us, but these are not ones that are appealing for the pollinators. This is a paper I came across showing variability within species. These are all flowers of the same species. These are all flowers of the same species. These are all flowers of the same species. These differences among flowers could be genetic differences, or they could be due to environmental conditions, leading these individual plants to put more energy into one sort of thing than another. Regarding the pollinator visitation to these flowers, we've always thought that nectar is nectar, but we are learning that's not the case. When our pollinators are opting to visit some flowers as opposed to others, it's not necessarily just a visual thing. This was a study published in 2017, and these researchers were looking at all kinds of Cochiana, a wild tobacco. They've got all of these different species of wild tobacco, and these different species have very different amounts of glucose, fructose, and sucrose in their nectar. So just like our own bodies process glucose, fructose, and sucrose different, as people who have diabetes are certainly aware of, these different flowers that are producing different proportions of these different sugars in their nectar would be serving as different kinds of food sources for the pollinators. Some species of pollinators might really do better with more glucose, whereas others might do better with more sucrose or possibly more fructose. So they can select different species depending on what their needs are. There are also differences in amino acids in nectars. Amino acids are actually the building blocks of proteins. And just like we need protein for our bodies to be able to grow and maintain our own characteristics and abilities, all other living beings also need all kinds of different amino acids. It turns out that nectar is not just sugar water. Nectar contains all kinds of amino acids as well. So all of our pollinators are getting protein in their diet from those nectars as well. This study was published 5 years ago. I know this looks complicated, but I'm going to walk through this for you here. The species are grouped by family. These are all plants that are in the aster family, and these are all different species within there. All of the different colored and patterned bits in the bars here are showing different amino acids and proportions of those amino acids. This type of thistle here, the Sersium oleraceum, doesn't have many amino acids at all, very low in protein compared to this species here, which has tons of protein. It has lots of this amino acid and lots of this amino acid and lots of this one, whereas other species within this group don't have the same proportions of those. We know now that the nectar of different plants is providing our pollinators with different levels and different kinds of amino acids. So we can expect that different species have different needs, and the preferences that they have for different plants reflects those needs. Zooming in here, this is in the pea family, Fabaceae. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different species of clover here that we're looking at. Just within this one genus, all of these species of clover also have quite different representations of these varying amino acids within their nectar. So it really does matter whether we are using plants that are native to an area or not native to an area. If we're planting a lot of non-native plants, that could be simply junk food as far as nutrition to our pollinators is concerned. If our pollinators are not well adapted to being offered all of these new kinds of foods, their bodies might need something completely different from what we're offering them. These are amino acids in pollen. We've long thought of pollen as having lots of protein in it. All of these different colors here are showing all kinds of different amino acids and how those proportions vary between species here. When I started learning about these differences in nectars and pollens, it really just blew my mind. It was so cool to think about how different all of these food sources are for our pollinators who are feeding on them. I thought this was a funny headline that growth rate of bumblebee larvae is related to pollen amino acids. This is just something that we haven't thought about with regards to things like pollinators, but we certainly know that the growth of our own children is related to the amount of protein in their diet. Lo and behold, the amount of protein available in the diets of bumblebee larvae also affects how quickly they're able to grow up and mature and be healthy. So we can consider our offerings to our pollinators in our gardens and our herbivores and all these other things similar to our salad bars. If we're only providing them with a handful of species and we only have certain cultivars of those species available, we're providing our wildlife with a salad bar that looks much more like this. They might be eating what's there simply because that's all that they have available to them. But if we provided them with a wider range of options, that would give them more choices to be able to select the foods that they feel are better for them. The data on the nutritional quantities of nectar and pollen is really, really early in stages of research. We're just now learning that these differences even exist. It would very much surprise me if we had data for nutritional differences among cultivars of any plants. We have really not much data other than what I just showed you relating to nutritional differences between species or even families. So this is a really new area of research. This was a study just a few years ago that came out showing how bees and flies, beetles and moths and butterflies have different preferences for these different types of rudbeckias. This is the straight species Rudbeckia triloba. We've got a few different cultivars of different species here. This is the wild type Rudbeckia fulgida. The proportion of bees versus flies versus butterflies that visited these indicate to us that the nutritional values or the ability of these different types of pollinators to access the nectar and pollen of these 5 different individual Rudbeckias is quite different. we're really just at the tip of the iceberg to learn about these things. If we only look at this one species of bumblebee, this bumblebee loved this one cultivar of this one species. It wasn't offered other cultivars of that species. So we don't know if that's true for the bumblebee, if it always loves this cutleaf coneflower, or if it was just this one individual cutleaf coneflower that this bumblebee really loved compared to all of these other types of rudbeckias. We are just at the tip of the iceberg learning these sorts of things. The things that we have been able to collect data on are things like what color are the petals? How tall are the plants? How large are the flowers? How wide are the flowers? How deep is the corolla of that flower? We have frequently measured things like the nectar volume, and that might be the same across all of these different kinds of plants. But what about the fructose to the glucose to the sucrose proportions? Those look like they're different for these 5 plants. When the bumblebee is saying, okay, I really like the herbs ton, is that because it's simply a taller plant? Is it because it has more of the sucrose or more of the fructose and glucose compared to the sucrose? Maybe it has different amino acid balances. We really don't know. This is a puzzle that we still have a lot of work to do in terms of figuring out what all the pieces are and being able to measure them. What works best in one year is not necessarily going to be the best in another year. I'm running out of time here, but I think you get the picture that there's a lot of variability here within species, if not among the different cultivars themselves. So really, it depends on what our goal is as gardeners and landscapers and cultivators of all of these plants. Is our goal to have things that have a certain look in our landscaping? Do we want the red cedar cultivar that has slightly more bluish or reddish leaves than the wild type generally has? Do we want the winged sumac or the arrowwood viburnum that has the leaves that have more red pigments all year long? Is that something that we want to emphasize in our garden, or do we want to emphasize variability within those individuals to provide the wildlife with a more diverse salad bar from which to choose the foods that they want? Someone asked about sterile cultivars. This is absolutely a thing. Within the aster family, it's very common for an individual plant to refuse to fertilize itself. Here we've got the native species, Coreopsis verticillata. Here we have one cultivar of it, moonbeam. Moonbeam refuses to pollinate itself. It does not want to reproduce with itself, and so it refuses to do so. You cannot have fertile cultivars if the plant will not fertilize itself. In order for this cultivar to produce seeds, depending on the mechanism of that, the pollen of this cultivar might be able to fertilize plants over here of the Coreopsis verticillata. But the female parts of these plants are not likely to be able to actually produce viable seeds. We don't know if a sterile cultivar feeds pollinators. Some sterile cultivars may not even produce pollen. If they don't produce pollen, then any that feed on pollen are out of luck. They might produce nectar, they might not. That's going to vary a lot. What the nutritional value is of that nectar, we don't know. We do know that it would be the same among all of the individuals of a certain cultivar. So if we stick with individuals of those cultivars in our gardens, then we're only providing that one option. It might be a good one, it might be a not good one. Regardless, it's just one option. We know spinach is good for us, but if we only ate spinach, we would not be healthy individuals. Even if we find one thing that is good for us, it's important that we have variety in our diet, right? There are a lot of cultivars out there that refuse to breed with themselves, refuse to produce viable seeds, but there have been many instances in the past of plants that were bred to be sterile cultivars mutating over time so that they become fertile again. The cultivar that we know as the Bradford pear, that was initially cultivated to be a sterile cultivar. That plant should not have been producing viable offspring, but we know now that it does. It has reverted to the state where it is able to now produce viable offspring, and they get all over the place. Nature will find a way. In terms of ecosystem stability and resilience, it's better for the ecosystems if we have a variety of genotypes there. If we don't stick with just the cultivars, but if we actually have more variability within our habitats, what we can do to be helpful is try to get those genetic differences among our plants. If we're looking for a certain look to our garden, if we need to have uniformity in our plantings, we need to have a certain shape or size or form, then a cultivar or nativar will be the way to go. If we're using cultivars, we should use them simply for aesthetic purposes rather than the role that those plants are playing in our environment. If you want something that is going to be contributing the most to ecosystem function and nutritional needs of pollinators, it's very important for us to maintain genetic diversity so that the organisms that are out there will have a variety from which to choose. If you need to contact me, if you have more questions, you can email me at either of these addresses, carrie@forthebirdsandthebees.com, or you can also always reach me at carriedigiaco.com. I want to just give a plug to this new group that I have co-founded and established. We could use a lot of help with volunteers if you are interested in helping to preserve and conserve variability among our native plants. We've got this organization that is rescuing native plants from areas that are about to be cleared for development. In doing so, we are helping to keep those genes alive within our native populations. What sorts of questions do we have that we should address now? Thanks.
I think you've answered everything that's come into our chat box. Thank you so much for carrying us through the story here and presenting incredible background and leading us up to some really thoughtful points as gardeners. The consistency, the look, the aesthetic that we often want versus really what's bringing value to the ecosystem with variability. It's very complex, as somebody says.
It's a very complex topic and it's very multi-layered.
It says what to look for in labels.
In terms of what to look for on a label, let me share the presentation again here. Looking at those plant labels, if we're looking for the wild type, we want to look for names that have two parts in italics like this, or they might be underlined instead of italicized in some situations. Having these two parts to the name, this is the genus and the species. This says that this is the wild type or straight species, so there will be variability among individuals. Some might be healthier, some might be taller, some might be fuller, some will have more flowers or fewer flowers or brighter flowers. But anything that has a tag that has an additional part to the name that's in quotes like this, like Picabella or Fragrant Angel, those are cultivars. So you can look up online characteristics of those cultivars. We're so lucky now. We've got the entire world's accessible knowledge in our pockets on our phones the whole time that we're out shopping for plants. So you can be in the garden center and you can Google Echinacea purpurea, Picabella, and you can see exactly what characteristics that cultivar is known for. You can see whether that Fragrant Angel is likely to be a shorter plant or a taller plant. If you're just looking at the straight species, there's likely to be more variation, more variability within it. I always look for, if at all possible, a plant that is the wild type. If I'm in a situation where all I can find are cultivars, for example, I wanted to buy some Phlox subulata, creeping phlox for the area next to the driveway. So I go to the garden center and they have cultivars, only cultivars, but they do have lots of cultivars. They have some with white flowers, light pink flowers, bright pink flowers, some with stripes, some with lavender, all these different kinds. So what I did was buy one individual of each cultivar they had. I think I ended up with 10 different cultivars. So I have 10 different genetic possibilities there, right? So they can interbreed with each other. I've got 10 different options there. Surely one of them will be more attractive to the pollinators than the others. One will have better nutritional components than the others. I just try to maximize my genetic diversity whenever I can, just trying to get as many different varieties of things as I can.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, I think that concludes our very interesting, amazing talk this morning.